So yes guys, this is puzzle number 1, and as you can see here, white's king is in the corner, white's knight is on c4, bishop is on a2, and the rooks are aligned on these files, f and e files. This game is right now in its middle game phase. Black's pieces are on these squares. Now as you can see, this bishop is controlling this square, so this king cannot come over here. Also, black's rook is pointed towards the h2 pawn. So in this position we will first see what are the checks, captures and threats. How many checks do we have? We have a total of right now one check only. And how many captures do we have? We have one capture with the knight, and along with that any other capture I can't notice right now. How many threats do we have? We see, if we calculate rook captures h2, then we can see that after the rook captures h2, the king will have to capture, because these squares are covered by the knight and the bishop. So the king is forced to capture over here. If the king captures on h2, then the line would go like rook takes h2, king takes h2, and then black can play this rook over to the h file, bring this rook over to the h file, and then it will be a checkmate, because these squares would be covered and the black king is in check, so it can't even go back to its original square. So let's see how this would look like. Black plays rook takes h2 check, king takes h2. Now this thing which happened here, this can also be called as a magnet tactic or attraction tactic, where one side sacrifices its material to lure the pieces of the opponent to a specific square or a specific place. Like this rook was sacrificed on h2, the king captured back on h2, the king has been lured on this square, on the h2 square, and now the knight is covering these squares, the bishop over here is covering this square, and now black plans to play rook h8, and this is a checkmate because the king can't go anywhere and it's in check. So yes guys, this was the first puzzle. Congratulations if you solved it. Let's move on to the next puzzle. So yes guys, this is puzzle number 2 from the book. In this position, as you can see, black's king is on g8 and it's quite open right now to attacks from white, and it's white to play. White's king is right now over here on d3. It's in the center of the board, almost the center of the board, and black has a queen over here, a knight, bishops. This game is also in its middle game phase. White is having the bishops on these squares, the knight is very inactive. So to solve this puzzle, first you can pause the video and think of the answer. Here first we'll calculate the checks, captures and threats chronologically. So how many checks do we have? We have check 1, check 2. There are no other checks we have right now, so we will calculate these checks. So if we play rook f8 check, then the king can't capture because this square is being protected with this bishop. So the rook would be protected by the bishop and the king can't capture. So this bishop over here will be forced to capture the rook on this square. And then white has to play something which will go in line with their plan of attack, their initiative. So this queen is right now blocked with this rook, so this queen can't enter into the main squares where the black king can be attacked. Like for example, the queen can't come here, or the queen can't come here right now. This rook needs to be moved, and this check, if we calculate the line, it would look something like this: rook f8 check, bishop takes f8, and then how many checks do we have in that position where rook f8 check, bishop takes f8. In this position we have one check. This pawn, if we play to d6, we would have another check. So in this position we would have two checks, and the queen coming on this square to give a check, that wouldn't work that well, because let's say for example black plays knight g7, and then if the bishop captures, it's no use because the queen can't alone make any progress, and there would be no checkmate. The queen can capture this bishop over here and give a check, but simply black could defend this by playing this move, the bishop to f8. So let's go back to where we were. Rook takes f8 check. Now bishop takes f8. Here we calculated this queen check, which wasn't working that well. So now let's calculate the next check. Here if we play pawn to d6 check, it will be a discovered check. Now I would like to make you understand what is a discovered check. Basically, when a piece, long ranged piece, is facing towards the king and another piece or pawn is in front of it, and when the pawn or piece moves to another square, thereby opening up the path to that piece and the king, it becomes a discovered check. So pawn to d6 check is played. Here as we can see, bishop e6 is a move. The king doesn't have any squares to go because this square is being covered with the bishop, and also this square is being covered with the bishop. The queen can also come and guard the king on d5, but that would simply be a queen sacrifice for no reason. So let's calculate this bishop to e6. Bishop to e6, simply bishop captures e6, and as we can see in this position, bishop is giving a check to the king. The king has no place to go to as this bishop is controlling this square, and this is a checkmate. So this line worked for us, so we will simply follow this line. Congratulations if you could solve this puzzle. Let's move on to the next puzzle. Okay guys, this is puzzle number 3 from the book. As you can see in this position, the game is in a middle game phase where white's pieces are in the center. These bishops are aligned over here. This rook is active in the central file. So later we would have to capitalize the activeness of this rook. The knight is here. This rook is pretty inactive, and black's pieces are over here. Both the bishops are aligned. This knight is on f4. This knight is attacking this bishop on e2. Both the rooks are pretty inactive for black, and the queen is in the center attacking this pawn. The queen has its eye on the g5 square attacking the pawn. In this position we have to calculate the checks, captures and threats. So in this position white, as we can see, is having no checks. Next we have to calculate the captures and threats. How many captures are we having over here? We have capture number 1, we have capture number 2, and we have no other capture. We have capture with the queen on d6. So let's calculate all of them. Now bishop takes a7 capture is of no use because bishop takes a7, rook takes a7, and simply that's just a sacrifice of a bishop for a pawn, which is very irrelevant. The next capture we'll be looking at is queen captures d6. Queen captures d6, pawn would capture d6, and it would be a loss of a queen for a bishop. Listen one thing. I know some of the captures I'll be showing you are irrelevant, but after all, a capture is a capture. We have to capture the things and calculate the lines and go all the way to see which one is good for us and which one the position is demanding which capture and which check, which line. The next capture we'll be looking at is bishop takes f4, bishop takes f4, pawn takes f4. Then what would happen? Let's see. Bishop takes f4, pawn takes f4. Now the queen if captures over here, simply the bishop would take, so that would be of no use. Do we have any threats? There are no other remaining useful captures, but we have good moves like rook g1 to centralize the rook. We have h4. Another move coming to my mind is pawn e5. Pawn e5. What does pawn e5 do? Pawn e5 attacks the bishop, and the bishop has to move to any of the squares where it is not being attacked. So what happens is, this is a threat. What threat does it cause? If the bishop has to move somewhere, simply then the queen will capture the bishop on d7. The queen would capture back and black would simply be down a piece. So that's the best move in this position, and that's the correct move in this position. That is pawn to e5, attacking the bishop. The bishop will move or capture back the pawn, and we will simply capture this bishop. Queen captures, rook captures d7, and white is up a piece. Black is having a bishop, rook, rook. White is having two rooks, a bishop, and knight. Okay, guys, congratulations if you could solve this puzzle. Let's move on to the next puzzle. Okay, guys, now we'll be looking at puzzle number 4. In this puzzle, as we can see that the minor pieces have been traded off and the game has come down to a heavy piece end game. What I mean by heavy pieces is the queen, rook, rooks, and the opposing queen and rooks. These are not minor pieces, these are considered as heavy pieces. That is why they are termed like that. So in this position, as we can see, black's rooks are aligned on the d file and black's queen is on e4. White is having a rook which is protecting the king from the queen and a rook on the d8 square. The queens are facing each other. So now we will calculate the checks, captures and threats again as we did. How many checks do we have in this position? Let's calculate with the queen first. The queen is having check 1, check 2, check 3, check 4, check 5 and check 6. The queen is having 6 checks, and out of all of the check, this check on c4 is the best looking check, because the other checks, even though they are checks, but they are not very useful and they are irrelevant because we will be losing our queen for no reason. So let's calculate this. If queen to c4 check is played, then simply it will help white. Now you can pause and think why it will help white, because white can simply play rook d3 and white will have both the rooks on the file facing black's rooks, and it will help white in aligning the rooks together. Again, both rooks together on a file are very strong, that is why it is very good to bring both of them together. So this would be the line, and black wouldn't surely want something like this because there are other better opportunities in the position. Now we will calculate the check with the rook. The rook giving a check on d2, what that does is it forces the king to move away from the second rank. If the king goes back to f1, that would simply be a losing move from white side. The reason being I'll show you by showing you by playing the line. That is rook d2 check, king f1, and simply the rook would capture the rook on d1, giving a check to the king, also attacking the queen at the same time. Here the queen is forced to take. If the queen doesn't take and simply white plays something else like this move, then black will play rook 8 d2 checkmate. This would be a nice mate. So in this position, white will capture with the queen and simply this. White has to move his king. Let's say white moves here, and now simply black is having a queen and rook. White is having only a rook. That wouldn't be very good for white. So the correct move in this position is rook d2 check. Rook d2 check. Now if the rook takes back, then one thing you would be noticing clearly, that if the rook takes back, then the rook would leave the guard of this queen on the last rank, and simply if the rook captures back, then black would capture the queen on b1, and simply white would capture this rook, and now black has a queen and white has a rook, so it's not balanced at all. It's very good for black. So that's how this position would continue. That is rook d2 check, rook takes back, queen takes queen, rook captures rook on d8, king takes back, and this is the position. And the other line we saw before, that if the king goes to f1, what we would be doing. So yes guys, rook d2 check was the move. It was the correct move. Congratulations if you all found it. Let's move on to the next puzzle. Okay guys, this is puzzle number 5 from the book. Now this is an opening phase of the game where white has just developed bishop, the knight, and is about to castle. Also this bishop will be coming out on one of these squares, and black has also developed their bishops, their knights. This bishop on the g4 square, this knight will be coming out over here, and black will simply castle. In this position we have to calculate the checks, captures and threats again, because that's the main thing about calculation, that is calculating the checks, all the captures, all the threats in the position. Now as we can see, how many checks do we have? We have one check with this bishop on b5 and another check on f7 with this bishop. How many captures are we having? We have knight takes e5 capture. Even this is a capture, bishop to f7, giving a check to the king and also capturing this pawn. How many threats are we having? Now if we see carefully, bishop takes f7, what that does is, again this applies as the attraction tactic, the magnet tactic, where if the bishop is sacrificed on f7, the king will capture back, and that will lead to a fork on e5. That fork will fork this bishop and the king. The king would have to move to any square and the knight would just capture the bishop. So this would be the line. Bishop takes f7, king takes f7, knight takes e5, king would go somewhere and the knight would capture this bishop. If this knight captures back, then the queen would simply capture the knight. And in this position, White is better because white will simply castle the king, short castle the king. Black's position is very opened up and the pieces are not arranged properly at all. White has a simple plan of action: bring out the bishop, develop the knight, castle short side or long side, and this queen is pretty active as compared to black's queen. So the correct move here is bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7, knight to e5 check, king g8, knight takes g4. So yes guys, this was the solution to puzzle number 5. Let's move on to the next puzzle. Congratulations if you could find the correct move. So guys, this is puzzle number 6 from the book. Here as we can see, white's pieces are over here and black's pieces are more or less in the center of the board. The rooks of black are pretty inactive and white has one difference, that white is having a very active rook on c1 pointed towards the c6 square. Now in this position we will calculate the checks, captures and threats again. How many checks are we having? Right now in this position we are having one check with this bishop on g5. We have another check with this queen on h4. Both of them are not very useful because if bishop to g5 check, the king would go somewhere. Let's say the king to e8, or simply black could play knight e8 and protect the king, exchanging the knights like this. But that would lead to a disadvantage as white would capture this bishop over here. That would be a big disadvantage for black as black would be a piece down. So knight to e8 wouldn't be a good move. Simply black can step aside and play king c8 if this bishop gives a check over here. The next check we'll be looking at is queen h4 check. If queen h4 check is played, simply the knight can capture and that would be a very big mistake from white. Again, as I mentioned, we have to look at all the checks and captures even though they are irrelevant or unimportant. A check is a check and a capture is a capture. In this position, how many captures are we having? We have bishop takes c6 capture, we have rook takes c6 capture, so we have two captures. And we have queen takes a7 capture. So in this position, if white captures the knight with the by playing bishop takes c6, then black will simply play bishop takes c6, and over here if white plays bishop d5, black will capture white's queen, bishop captures b6, pawn takes b6, and in this position as we can see, black is having two rooks, a knight, a bishop. Black has double pawns, but that wouldn't really matter to black. That wouldn't really bother black that much because black is having two rooks and white would have one rook, two knights. And a healthy pawn structure, but two knights and a rook, that is not at all better than what black is having in this position. So that wouldn't be a good line. In this position, if rook captures c6, bishop captures c6, bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6. In this position, white will simply play um, bishop a5. Now the queen is pinned to the king. What is a pin? When a piece is in front of the king and it is being attacked by an opposing side's piece, the piece cannot move. So that's called a pin. Here this queen is pinned and simply black will lose a queen. So the correct move would be rook takes c6, b takes c6, bishop a5 attacking the queen, it is pinned to the king, king c7, bishop takes b6 check, a takes b6, queen c2. What does queen c2 do? Queen c2 basically pins this pawn to the king, and that is why this pawn can't capture the bishop on b5. So that's why the queen was played to c2. So yes guys, rook takes c6 was the correct move. Congratulations if you could find it. Sorry for the mistake.